March 18th, 1314. Paris, Ile de la Cité. The flames are rising. An old man is tied to a wooden stake. His name is Jacques de Molay. He is 70 years old. He is the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, one of the most powerful military and financial organizations in medieval Europe, and he is being burned alive. As the fire consumes him, de Molay does not scream. He does not beg. Instead, he shouts a curse. He calls out to King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V. He declares that within a year, both of them will stand before God to answer for their crimes. 1 month later, Pope Clement V is dead. 7 months after that, King Philip IV is dead. Both men gone within a year, just as de Molay predicted. The story you have been told is that the Templars were executed for heresy, for worshipping false idols, for committing acts of blasphemy and depravity. The official charges included spitting on the cross, denying Christ, worshipping a demon named Baphomet, and engaging in obscene rituals. But here's the question you should be asking. These men were the most devout Christian warriors in Europe. They had spent 2 centuries defending the Holy Land. They had taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They were, by all historical accounts, fanatics for the faith. So why, suddenly, in 1307, did the King of France and the Pope declare them to be Satan-worshipping heretics? The answer is simple, and it has nothing to do with religion. The Knights Templar were not executed because of what they believed. They were executed because of what they owned, and more importantly, because of what the King of France owed them. This was not a religious purge. This was the first recorded sovereign default in European history. A king who could not pay his debts did what desperate debtors have done throughout history. He killed his creditors. Let me take you back to the beginning. To understand why the Templars were burned, you need to understand how they became the wealthiest institution in Europe. And that story begins not with swords, but with financial innovation. The Knights Templar were founded in 1119. Originally, they were a small military order tasked with protecting Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. The roads from Europe to the Holy Land were dangerous. Bandits, thieves, rival armies. Pilgrims were constantly being robbed, kidnapped, or killed. The Templars provided security. But they quickly realized something. The biggest risk pilgrims faced was not violence, it was carrying money. A pilgrim traveling from London to Jerusalem might need to carry months or even years of savings in gold and silver coins. If they were robbed, they lost everything, and robbery was almost guaranteed. So the Templars invented a solution, a system that would change finance forever. They created the medieval equivalent of a check. Here is how it worked. A pilgrim would go to a Templar monastery in London or Paris. They would deposit their gold and silver with the Templars. In exchange, they would receive a coded letter of credit, a piece of parchment with encrypted symbols that only the Templars could read. The pilgrim would then travel to Jerusalem carrying nothing of value, just the letter. When they arrived, they would present the letter to the Templar fortress in Jerusalem, and the Templars would give them the equivalent amount of money, minus a small service fee. This was revolutionary. The Templars had created a transferable note, a way to move value across vast distances without physically moving gold. They had invented the check, the wire transfer, the promissory note, and they did it 700 years before modern banking. And because this system worked, pilgrims trusted the Templars with their wealth, kings trusted them, nobles trusted them. The Templars were not just warriors, they were bankers, and they were very, very good at it. By the early 1300s, the Templars controlled a financial network that spanned Europe and the Middle East. They owned castles, fortresses, farms, vineyards, and entire towns. They managed the treasuries of multiple kingdoms. They financed wars. They brokered loans. They were, in effect, the international monetary fund of the medieval world, except they had their own army. And this is where the story turns dangerous, because when you are the richest institution in Europe and you lend money to kings, you become a target, especially when those kings cannot pay you back. Enter Philip IV of France, Philip the Fair, a king with expensive tastes and an empty treasury. Philip inherited a kingdom drowning in debt. He had fought costly wars against England. He had debased the currency by reducing the silver content in French coins, trying to inflate his way out of debt. It did not work. He had expelled the Jews from France and confiscated their property. It still was not enough. And now he owed a massive sum to the Knights Templar. We do not know the exact amount. Medieval accounting records are incomplete, but we know it was enormous. The Templars had financed Philip's wars. They had loaned him money to run the government, and Philip could not pay them back. Worse, Philip had seen the Templar treasury firsthand. In 1306, there was a riot in Paris. Philip fled to the Templar fortress for safety, and while hiding inside, he saw the vaults, rooms filled with gold, silver, jewels, the wealth of an empire. And Philip realized something. If he could seize that wealth, he could solve his financial problems permanently. But he could not just confiscate Templar assets. The Templars were a religious military order under the protection of the Pope. They had diplomatic immunity. They answered to no king. Legally, Philip had no authority to touch them. So he did what rulers do when the law does not allow them to take what they want. He changed the narrative. He fabricated charges. He launched a propaganda campaign. And he convinced the Pope to go along with it. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Philip struck. At dawn, across every Templar property in France, royal soldiers executed coordinated raids. It was the first synchronized police operation in European history. Hundreds of Templars were arrested simultaneously. They were dragged from their beds, chained, and thrown into dungeons. Their assets were seized, their fortresses were occupied, and the king declared them enemies of God. The charges were lurid. The Templars were accused of worshipping a demon head called Baphomet, of spitting on the cross during secret initiation rituals, of denying Christ, of engaging in homosexual acts, of using black magic. Every accusation was designed to horrify the medieval Christian population and justify their destruction. Were any of these charges true? Almost certainly not. We know this because the confessions were obtained under torture, medieval torture, the rack, the strappado, red-hot irons. Men will confess to anything under that kind of pain. And many Templars did confess. They admitted to whatever their interrogators wanted to hear. And then, when they were no longer being tortured, many recanted. They said they had lied to make the pain stop. But it did not matter. Philip had what he needed, confessions. And with those confessions, he could justify seizing Templar wealth and executing the leadership. Think about what this actually was. The King of France owed money to the Templars. He could not pay. So instead of defaulting, instead of declaring bankruptcy, he invented criminal charges, arrested his creditors, tortured them into confessing to crimes they did not commit, and then burned them alive. And in doing so, he erased his debts. This is not just medieval history. This is a financial mechanism that has been repeated throughout history. When a sovereign debtor cannot pay and the creditor is within their jurisdiction, the debtor does not default. They destroy the creditor. Look at what happened in Cyprus in 2013. The government was bankrupt. Banks were failing. Depositors had their savings confiscated to recapitalize the banks. The legal term is bail-in. The practical term is theft. The government could not pay its obligations, so it took the money from the people who had trusted the system. Look at what happened to the kulaks in the Soviet Union. Wealthy peasant farmers. The state needed resources, so it declared them enemies of the people, confiscated their land, and sent them to labor camps. The crime was not what they did. The crime was what they owned. The pattern is always the same. The state is in crisis. It needs resources. It identifies a group that has wealth. It invents a justification, and it takes what it wants. Philip IV did not hate the Templars because they were heretics. He hated them because they were his creditors. And creditors, when they are owed too much, become a political threat. Because a debtor king is always at the mercy of the people he owes. And Philip refused to be at anyone's mercy, so he burned them, and with them, his debts. The execution of Jacques de Molay in 1314 was the final act. Philip had already dismantled the Templar order. Most of the wealth had been seized, though not all of it. Much of the Templar fortune vanished. Some believe it was hidden, some believe it was transferred to other orders, like the Knights Hospitaller. Some believe it was smuggled out of France entirely, possibly to Scotland or Portugal. But Philip got enough. Enough to stabilize his treasury. Enough to eliminate his debts. And enough to send a message. Do not lend to kings, because kings do not repay. They rewrite history. And that brings us to the curse. The story of de Molay's final words, calling down divine retribution on Philip and Clement. Is it true? Did he really curse them from the flames? We do not know. Medieval chroniclers reported it. But they also reported miracles and demons. What we do know is that both men died within a year. Coincidence? Possibly. Or perhaps the stress of orchestrating one of the greatest financial crimes in history took its toll. But the legacy of that Friday the 13th endures. The superstition around that date originates here, with the mass arrest of the Templars, with the destruction of an order that had become too powerful, too wealthy, and too dangerous to the established order. So what is the lesson? What does a medieval execution of warrior monks teach us about finance today? It teaches us that when you lend to someone who controls the legal system, you are not a creditor. You are a risk, and if that borrower cannot pay, they will not default. They will eliminate you. The Templars thought they were untouchable. They had wealth. They had fortresses. They had the protection of the Pope, and they were still destroyed because they made one fatal mistake. They loaned money to a king who had the power to rewrite the rules. Modern banks think they are too big to fail, that governments will always bail them out, that the system will protect them because the system needs them. The Templars thought the same thing, and they were wrong. History shows us that when the survival of the state is at stake, no institution is safe, no amount of wealth buys immunity, and no legal protection is permanent, because the people who write the laws can always change them. Philip IV of France proved that on Friday, October 13th, 1307. And every sovereign default since has followed the same script. Invent a justification, seize the assets, erase the debt, and rewrite history to make yourself the hero. The Templars were not heretics. They were bankers, and they were killed for the same reason bankers have always been killed, because they were owed money by someone who had the power to make them disappear. Here's what I want you to do. Go to the comments right now. Do you think the Knights Templar were actually guilty of heresy? Or do you think they were just convenient scapegoats for a king who needed to cancel his debts? Write one word. Heretics or victims? Let me know what you believe. And if this video changed how you see medieval history, share it with someone who still thinks the Templars were devil worshippers instead of the world's first international bankers.